A cage is a device created by humans to contain an animal, to prevent its escape. The animal is inside the cage, the human outside. But what happens when the roles are reversed? In today's story, a human was the one caged, while those who locked the victim inside revealed themselves as true animals. And before we get started, be kind enough to support my channel. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and stay active. It will help a lot. I will be very grateful to you for that. Let's get started. Today, we travel to the remote corners of Missouri to unravel an incredibly complex case. In 2021, a woman named Cassidy Rainwater, a mother of 6, went missing there. Her loved ones felt as though she had vanished into thin air or disappeared from the face of the earth. A few weeks later, deeply disturbing images surfaced on the dark web. A half-naked Cassidy was chained inside a locked cage in the middle of a forest. The woman appeared to have been tortured. Her haunted gaze hinted at unbearable torment. The photographs were so horrifying that they made one wonder if they were some kind of gruesome hoax. The police investigation lifted the veil on 2 monsters living in that forest. A whole network of crimes was uncovered, but some questions remain unanswered to this day. Cassidy Rainwater was born on June 9, 1988, meaning she was 33 years old in 2021. She grew up in Lebanon, Missouri with her parents, Clifford and Tracy, and her 3 brothers and sister. Cassidy was described as a cheerful and very outgoing person. From a young age, she had a passion for poetry and singing. Rainwater called herself a typical country girl. She met the father of her first child, Ben, in high school. Right after graduation, she became pregnant. Their relationship was far from happy, so the young couple soon parted ways. At 17, Cassidy sued Ben to enforce child support payments, which he complied with. But soon, the young woman decided it wasn't the right time for her to become a mother and gave the child up for adoption. About a year later, tragedy struck Cassidy's family. Her mother, Tracy, vanished without a trace. No one knew what had happened to her, and later, her daughter would share her mother's fate. Tracy had a hobby of collecting arrowheads in a nearby field. One day in April 2007, she went out, as usual, to search for her artifacts and disappeared. The family lived in uncertainty for a whole year, not knowing what had happened. Unfortunately, the police were unable to help at the time. In May 2008, a farmer spreading fertilizer in a neighboring field stumbled upon a pair of shoes and human bones. It was later determined that the remains belonged to Cassidy's mother. Tracy's death was now confirmed, dealing a devastating blow to her daughter. The mystery surrounding Tracy's disappearance and death was highly suspicious. It was strange that the woman couldn't be found for a year. If the police had searched more diligently and simply done their job, she likely would have been found much sooner. But Tracy's fate remains a mystery to this day, and no one knows what really happened to her. After this tragedy, Cassidy managed to pull herself out of depression. Over the next decade, she gave birth to 5 more children, all from different fathers. The woman's life was often unstable, but she loved her children more than anything in the world and was willing to do everything in her power for them. Later, Cassidy married a man named Zachary, the father of one of her children. They were wed in a local church. However, by 2021, the couple had separated and were living apart. Cassidy found herself in a difficult situation, as raising 5 children on her own was no easy task. She tried to manage parenting, but money was desperately scarce. In early 2021, Cassidy met a man named James Phelps and began visiting his cabin in the woods more frequently. Then, in July 2021, Cassidy vanished, just as her mother had years before. James Phelps was born in 1963 in the small town of Urbana, Missouri, with a population of just 400 people. The area was far from the hustle and bustle of city life and surrounded by forests. Children spent most of their time outdoors, as there were simply no other activities available. James attended the local high school and was listed among the top students. After graduating, he enlisted in the Army. Phelps married at the age of 30 and moved to St. Louis with his wife. In 2010, James's mother passed away, and he had to return to his hometown. He inherited his parents' house, but by then, his marriage had fallen apart. In 2019, James Phelps turned 56. He became an ordained minister in the Universal Life Church. After receiving his ordination, the man settled in a remote area outside Lebanon. His home was far off the beaten path. The location of the residence couldn't even be found on maps, as it was just an ordinary forest cabin. There were no neighbors around, no prying eyes. No one would see what the owner did in his free time. The road to James's property in the woods passed through a field full of abandoned cars. Vehicles of various makes had been sitting there for at least a decade. They were slowly rusting and becoming overgrown with grass and bushes. The place where Phelps lived seemed wild, eerie, like a scene from a horror movie, and utterly abandoned. In 2019, another person lived in the house besides James Phelps. His name was Timothy Norton. Timothy was born in 1965. He grew up in the same small town as James. They attended the same high school and were friends despite a slight age difference. After high school, Norton joined the Marine Corps, following James's example. At 23, Timothy married a 17-year-old girl who was still in high school. After leaving the service, he didn't know what to do with himself and began committing petty crimes. In the 1990s, he was convicted of assault. One day, Timothy came up with the brilliant idea of pouring gasoline on grass to start a forest fire. It's unclear what motivated him, but this foolish plan backfired. The gasoline canister he was holding caught fire and exploded, landing Norton in the hospital with second and third-degree burns. Karma at work in real time, you might say. After this, Timothy's life spiraled further downward. He divorced, then remarried another woman, and went off the deep end. The man completely neglected personal hygiene, stopping showers altogether, which was evident from his greasy, unwashed long hair. He also had a strange habit of wearing military boots 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. He even slept in them. As a result, his body emitted a genuine stench. The trailer where he lived resembled a dump. Every inch of the floor was literally covered in dog feces. Around this time, Timothy became heavily involved with illegal substances and began cheating on his wife left and right. Astonishingly, there were women willing to share a bed with this man. One day, his wife came home and caught him with a lover in their marital bed. This led to a second divorce. When Timothy was in his 50s, he moved in with his childhood friend James Fee in his creepy forest house. It was in this hidden place, away from prying eyes, that the tragedy unfolded. In 2021, when James was 58 and Timothy was 56, they became engrossed in exploring the dark web. The dark web is a hidden segment of the internet, inaccessible through common search engines. Its defining feature is multi-layered data encryption and user anonymity. Tracking activities in this network is nearly impossible. As a result, it's rife with content unacceptable to most people. It's a haven for hackers and all sorts of scammers. Timothy and James spent hours on the dark web, browsing all kinds of dubious websites with deeply disturbing content. They also joined online communities and forums, creating new aliases for themselves. The friends were primarily interested in adult content, most of which was filmed without the participants' consent. They were both drawn to scenes involving cruelty and aggression. They also enjoyed watching obscene images and videos involving minors. The dark web is full of perverts ready to supply such content. The friends downloaded certain videos to their hard drive to rewatch them whenever they wanted. It's worth noting that James Phelps was a church minister. He created a profile on an adult website, listing some of his interests, such as bondage, spanking, beatings, and role-playing. Phelps wrote in his profile that he was looking for a good girl to be his maid and live with him. In essence, he was searching for a slave. Apparently, there were no takers. At the same time, other people with criminal records for sex offenses occasionally stayed at this creepy forest house alongside James and Timothy. This was the kind of company the two friends kept. James and Timothy grew so close that they called themselves brothers. Their behavior, especially on the dark web, was already incredibly disturbing, perverse, and illegal. But things only got worse. After watching countless videos, the friends decided to stop at dark fantasies and turn them into reality. Their main fantasy was to have a woman at their disposal, someone who would obey their every command and do whatever they desired. So James and Timothy began devising a plan to lure a stranger into their eerie forest cabin. They literally held brainstorming sessions to figure out how to do it. The men agreed they needed someone vulnerable, like a teenager, who would be easier to deceive. The conspirators even settled on an age range, someone between 12 and 14 years old. Then it dawned on them that kidnapping a minor would attract too much attention and could create unnecessary problems. So it wasn't the best idea. Instead of a teenager, the friends decided to abduct a woman they found appealing. James and Timothy first turned to social media. They browsed profiles of women from their town, selecting potential targets based on photos. Then they went to the local supermarket, hanging out in the store, eyeing female shoppers and choosing whom to kidnap. But both approaches failed. Soon, an opportunity fell into James's lap when he befriended a woman named Cassidy Rainwater. From that moment, her fate was sealed. It's unclear what kind of relationship connected the mother of many children and the man living in the woods. But it's believed that Cassidy, unable to afford housing, temporarily left her children with relatives and moved into James's cabin. For Phelps and Norton, this was the fulfillment of their desires, as they were specifically looking for a vulnerable young woman. And Rainwater fit the role perfectly. Supposedly taking pity on the mother of many, James invited Cassidy to live in his house. And then she vanished. No one heard from her or saw her. At first, the woman's family didn't pay much attention to Cassidy's lack of communication. They thought she might have gone somewhere to earn money. It took a month for relatives to grow concerned. In the past, even if Cassidy dropped off the radar for a short time, she never stopped communicating with her children and never made her family worry about her. On August 25, 2021, Cassidy's aunt, a woman named Cora, who was the guardian of one of her children, called the police and reported her niece's disappearance. What happened to the mother of 6? Where could she have gone for so long? At some point, James Phelps and Timothy Norton decided to bring their fantasies to life. They kidnapped Cassidy and locked her in a large metal cage on the grounds of the forest cabin. It's believed the cage was custom-made in advance, as the two friends had long been planning to abduct a woman. It's unknown how long they kept Cassidy in that cage. The men came up with the sick idea of photographing their captive. They tore off her clothes, and while one abused her in various ways, the other captured it all on camera to later post the images on their dark web page. The photos showed Cassidy with visible injuries. She looked terrified, and her condition was dire. James and Timothy were part of various dark web communities. There, they not only shared photos, but also described in detail what they did to their captive. While the friends had previously been content with watching adult videos, they now began creating their own. Some of the photos suggested that the men took turns assaulting Cassidy, locked in the metal cage. She was likely let out of the cage at times, as Phelps and Norton primarily dreamed of having a maid who would follow their orders. Then they would put her back in the cage, like a wild animal. In truth, this story raises many unanswered questions. It's unknown what other horrific things happened to Cassidy while she was at the mercy of the two monsters living in the woods. After all, besides James and Timothy, other criminals occasionally showed up at the cabin, and they could very well have joined the two friends. Let's return to August 25th, 2021, when Cassidy's aunt, Cora, reported her niece's disappearance to the police. Law enforcement officers asked the woman who Cassidy had been in contact with before vanishing. Cora mentioned the name James Phelps. She had seen Rainwater get into James's silver pickup truck on July 25th. That was the last time she saw her niece alive. The police headed to the creepy cabin in the dense forest to speak with its owner. When the officers knocked on the door, Phelps appeared immediately. He acted as if he had nothing to hide. The man politely answered all the detectives' questions and was quite forthcoming. When the officers asked about Cassidy, James confirmed that Rainwater had indeed stayed with him for a couple of weeks, until she got back on her feet. But on July 25th, she packed up in the middle of the night, got into a car parked on the cabin's property, and drove off. Apparently, she was headed to Colorado, as she had mentioned something about the state earlier. So James had no idea where Cassidy was now. He hadn't seen her since that night. At the time, the police had no evidence that Phelps was lying. They gave the property a cursory glance, but finding no trace of the missing woman, the officers thanked James for his time and left. It seems the police didn't notice the metal cage on the property. Otherwise, they might have had some questions. For a week, law enforcement scoured the area but found nothing. Thus, James and Timothy managed to conceal Cassidy's abduction. Days passed with no progress in the case. The investigation into the woman's disappearance hit a dead end before it even began. The detectives had no leads. It's entirely possible that the two monsters living in the woods could have easily escaped punishment for their crime. But then, everything changed. On September 16, 2021, the FBI received an anonymous tip about images on the dark web of a half-naked woman in chains. She was being held in a large metal cage attached to a mechanical hoist used by hunters to gut game. The FBI immediately investigated these images. First, agents verified the authenticity of the photos. They were real, not manipulated. Next, they needed to identify the woman in the photos. Experts reviewed databases of missing persons, estimated the possible time and place the photos were taken, and tried to piece it all together. Miraculously, the FBI came across Rainwater's case. They compared photos of women and realized that Cassidy was the very captive in the metal cage depicted in the dark web images. The FBI contacted the local sheriff's office and reported the discovery. The police realized they needed to search James's property again, as it was determined that the images matched the backyard of his property. They immediately obtained a warrant to search the house and the owner's electronic devices. Detectives arriving at the scene promptly seized James's cell phone and immediately found about a dozen images of Cassidy Rainwater, the very ones circulating on the dark web. This was more than enough to arrest James on the spot, and he was promptly handcuffed. But the disturbing discoveries didn't end there. Things only got worse. During a thorough search of the property, police found meat hooks hanging from the ceiling, with a large freezer standing in the center of the room beneath them. The officers were horrified at what they might find inside. They opened the freezer, and their worst fears were confirmed. Inside were several packages containing possible human remains, each labeled with a freezing date and body part. One of them was dated July 24th. Some remains were even vacuum sealed. Someone had clearly put significant effort into preparing them. When officers asked James if these were indeed human remains, as indicated on the packages, Phelps smirked and said he had actually treated a neighbor to barbecued human ribs the day before. At that moment, the officers were so shocked and repulsed that they didn't know how to react. Despite all these insane discoveries, they still held a faint hope of finding Cassidy alive. The contents of the freezer weren't yet proof that the woman was dead. Besides, they first needed to confirm that the remains were indeed human. The freezer's contents were immediately sent for analysis, while detectives tried to get the cabin's owner to reveal where Cassidy Rainwater had really gone. However, James refused to confirm or deny anything. He didn't assist the investigation at all. So they decided to talk to Norton, who lived in the forest cabin with Phelps. He was arrested and brought in for questioning at the sheriff's office, but Timothy also refused to comment. The police were left waiting for the results of the DNA testing of the suspected human remains, which could take up to 30 days. They still had no idea what had happened or where Cassidy was. The arrest of the two men on kidnapping charges, followed by the sheriff's office refusing to provide more details due to the extreme nature of the crime, sparked a wave of speculation online. As a result, law enforcement refused to comment on the case's details and condemned both bloggers and local journalists. Rumors about the case spread like wildfire in the local community and on social media. The media published news about the discovery of possible human remains found in the forest house where James and Timothy lived. This was the only information the police made public. Rumors that Phelps and Norton were serial killers spread rapidly through the town. This wasn't surprising, given how meticulously the remains were packaged and how carefully the body had been dismembered. It gave the impression that these two had significant experience and had likely done this before. The public's main theory was that the men lured women to their cabin, tortured them in the metal cage, posted images on the dark web, then killed them and sold the meat. While this sounds implausible, it at least explains the vacuum packaging and labeling. One person living nearby even claimed to have found human skin hanging from a tree, further fueling rumors about the killer friends. It got to the point where people linked Norton and Phelps to a criminal organization involved in exterminating women. This theory had some basis, as mentioned earlier, several individuals with prior convictions for sex crimes were registered at the forest cabin besides the two friends. The small town where this horrific crime took place buzzed like a beehive. These were just rumors, but they could all be true. Unfortunately, many questions in this case remain unanswered. The local sheriff was furious. He didn't want people discussing unconfirmed theories and called them fake news. He particularly criticized TikTok bloggers making videos about the case. The sheriff said, quite rightly, that it's not a good idea to listen to the opinions of young people sitting in their parents' apartments, munching chips, sipping soda, and dreaming of becoming social media superstars by spreading their speculations. He absolutely despised armchair detectives. 2 weeks after the discovery of human remains in James Phelps's house, both men were still in custody, and the DNA analysis results were still pending when a major development occurred in the case. The creepy forest cabin burned to the ground. The fire started suddenly in the middle of the night. Many pieces of evidence that hadn't been collected initially were still inside. Authorities couldn't understand how the fire started and launched an investigation. Experts determined it was arson. During the investigation, they found a tripwire connected to an explosive device in the house. Just to be safe, they called in a bomb squad to ensure the device was neutralized. Someone had deliberately planted the explosive to accelerate the fire. Since James and Timothy were in custody, they clearly weren't involved, but they likely asked someone to set the house on fire. The blaze at the forest cabin further fueled rumors that a criminal gang was operating in the area. Could these people have been connected to Cassidy's disappearance? What were they trying to hide by burning the house to the ground? What evidence might have been left inside that they rushed to destroy? Questions multiplied by the day. All this time, Cassidy's family held on to hope that she was alive. They prayed she would reach out. Sadly, that didn't happen, as in November 2021, 6 weeks after James and Timothy's arrest, relatives received devastating news that the human remains found in the freezer belonged to Cassidy Rainwater. Additionally, over 200 pieces of evidence related to the missing woman, such as blood traces and other DNA samples, were found in the house before the fire. Authorities had to inform Cassidy's family that she had passed away at 33, leaving behind 6 children. Initially, James and Timothy were charged only with kidnapping, but now a murder charge was added. Police interrogated them even more intensely, determined to extract a confession. Finally, the pressure paid off. Timothy Norton broke and revealed what really happened to Cassidy. One summer evening, James approached Timothy, who was sleeping in his truck. Phelps tapped on the window and told his friend he needed help because it was time to deal with Cassidy. The woman was sleeping in the house at the time, unaware of anything. The day before, they had let her out of the cage and allowed her to rest a bit. The men returned to the house. James approached the sleeping Cassidy and, wrapping his hands around her neck, began to strangle her. He asked his friend to hold the captive down until she stopped moving. Timothy pinned Cassidy's legs while James squeezed her throat. Then Phelps put a plastic bag over the victim's head to suffocate Rainwater. The odds were against her, and Cassidy, sadly, died. Though Timothy confessed how they took their captive's life, neither he nor James went into detail about what they did to Cassidy before depriving her of air. So it's still unknown what tortures and horrors the woman endured, locked in a metal cage in the middle of the forest. When Cassidy was dead, James asked Timothy to help carry the body outside and tie it to a nearby metal structure. That's when Phelps began the gruesome process of dismembering and removing all internal organs. It was horrific. Blood was everywhere. Judging by his expression, Timothy was shocked by what his friend was doing, but he did nothing to stop James. After finishing the organ removal, Phelps cut the flesh into small pieces and asked Norton to take the body parts to the bathtub. Norton did everything. He never said no to his friend. Over the next few days, James processed what was left of Cassidy, sealed vacuum packages, labeled them, and placed the remains in the freezer, which the police later discovered. All this came from Timothy Norton's account, but he didn't come across as a reliable or honest person either, so one can only guess how it really happened. After this confession, Timothy and James were set to face trial to answer for their atrocities. Initially, both men pleaded not guilty, so the trial was long and drawn out, but in the end, they both changed their stance. Clearly, the friends realized they had no chance of winning the case and that they could face the death penalty if they went to trial with a jury. In 2023, James Phelps entered an Alford plea. An Alford plea, or doctrine, is a type of plea deal practiced in the U.S. Under it, the defendant acknowledges the inability to refute the charges against them and the legal validity of a guilty verdict but maintains their innocence. Under an Alford plea, a defendant may plead guilty not because they committed the crime, but because the prosecution has enough evidence. In essence, the defendant agrees with the charges and may receive a lighter sentence while not admitting guilt. Meanwhile, Timothy Norton also pleaded guilty. Since both defendants took plea deals, they avoided the death penalty. Instead, they were sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In the end, Cassidy Rainwater's family had to wait 3 long years to have her remains returned, so they could finally bury her. This was the last wish of her children for their mother. They wanted to lay her to rest so they would have a place to visit, cry, and talk to the closest person in their lives. Losing their mother at such a young age, Cassidy's daughters and sons endured unimaginable emotional pain. The youngest girl had to see a psychologist, as she suffered from nightmares long after her mother's death. When some details of Cassidy's death became known, older children were bullied at school, teased, and humiliated in every way. Nevertheless, Cassidy's heirs remember their mother as the most wonderful person on earth, a hardworking and affectionate woman, and they are proud of her no matter what. At the funeral, the eldest son said that his mom tried so hard for them and gave them the best life she could. Cassidy Rainwater was not just a name in the news, not just a topic for newspaper discussions. She was real, a person loved by many. Cassidy lived the best she could. Because Phelps and Norton took a plea deal, there was no trial. As a result, many facts and pieces of evidence in this case were never made public. If the criminals hadn't posted images of their captive on the dark web, they might have escaped accountability altogether. The only comforting thought is that the beings who called themselves humans but acted like true animals ended up where they belong, behind bars in a prison cell. If you have finished watching, you are a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications, and put the like. See you in the next video.